Chosen one. Something's been happening in rooms you walk into and you haven't been able to name it. Conversations pause half a second too long. Eyes linger where they shouldn't. Someone you've never met watches you with an expression caught between recognition and discomfort. You've tried to dismiss it as imagination. You've tried to blame your own sensitivity. But it keeps happening, and it's happening more now than ever before. This isn't paranoia. This isn't ego. This is a signal. And today, you learn what it actually means. Let me describe something, and you tell me if it lands. You walked into a grocery store last week, or a meeting, or a family gathering somewhere completely ordinary. And something in the room shifted. Not dramatically, not the way it happens in movies. Just a slight change in pressure, like the air got heavier around you specifically. Someone looked up, held the look a beat too long, then looked away like they'd been caught doing something they didn't plan to do. And your first instinct wasn't confidence. It was a question, what's wrong with me? That question has followed you for years. Every time someone stares a second longer than normal, every time a stranger's expression shifts when you walk past, every time a room gets quieter. When you enter, your mind runs the same diagnostic. Is my outfit off? Did I do something wrong? Am I being judged? Here's the thing. You're asking the wrong question entirely. What's happening around you isn't evaluation. It's reaction. The same way metal that's been through a furnace reacts differently when it touches cold water. The same way a tuning fork struck at the right frequency makes every matching surface in the room vibrate without being touched. Something in you changed, and the environment you move through can't pretend it didn't. There's a principle in metallurgy that most people never think about. When raw ore enters a furnace, it looks like everything else in the pile, unremarkable, common, easy to overlook. But when that same material passes through sustained, precise heat that doesn't destroy but restructures at the molecular level, what comes out the other side is fundamentally different. The weight shifts. The surface reflects differently. Place it back in the same pile of raw material and it won't blend in anymore. Not because it's trying to stand out, because its composition has changed and everything around it registers that change, whether anyone wants it to or not. That's you right now. That's what's been happening. The seasons you walked through, the ones that felt pointless, the isolation that seemed cruel, the waiting that carried no explanation, those weren't random suffering. That was the furnace. And you didn't just survive it. You were restructured by it. The patience you now carry, where panic used to live, the stillness that replaced the constant need to prove yourself, the quiet discernment that lets you read a room in seconds while everyone else is still arranging their first impression. None of that was there before the fire. All of it is there now, and people feel it before they understand it. Stay with me, because this is where it gets precise. The prophet Malachi wrote something that most people read as poetry, but is actually engineering. He said the refiner sits like a silversmith, watching the metal in the fire, controlling the temperature, never leaving the furnace unattended. Not to destroy what's inside, to change its composition until it reflects clearly. That's not a metaphor for punishment. That's a description of process, precise, intentional, monitored heat applied to specific material for a specific duration to produce a specific result. You are that result. The discomfort you feel when people stare isn't weakness. It's unfamiliarity. You've spent so long being treated like raw ore that you don't yet recognize yourself as refined metal. But the rooms you walk into have already noticed. The people around you are already responding to something they can't name. This message won't promise you miracles by morning or wealth by weekend. What it will do is hand you the precise framework for understanding what's happening around you, why it's intensifying now, and what it's preparing you for. Not in vague spiritual language that sounds beautiful, but builds nothing in mechanical terms. You can apply to your next conversation, your next negotiation, your next decision about who gets access to what you carry. Anointed One. The refiner didn't bring you through that fire to leave you confused about what came out the other side. Every reaction you've been collecting is data. Every stare is information. And by the time this message ends, you won't just understand the signal, you'll know exactly how to steward it. But first, we need to dismantle the lens you've been using to interpret all of it. Because that old lens isn't just inaccurate, it's been costing you power every single day you've kept looking through it. That lens was installed early. Long before you had the language to question it, someone taught you that being noticed was dangerous. Maybe it was a parent who said, "Don't draw attention to yourself," not because they wanted to harm you, but because their own survival depended on invisibility. Maybe it was a classroom where the kid who stood out got punished for it, and you learned in real time that blending in was safer than being seen. Maybe it was subtler than that, a culture, a household, a religious environment where humility meant making yourself as small as possible so nobody felt threatened by what you carried. Whatever the source, the lesson landed the same way every time. Visibility equals vulnerability. Be seen and you will be targeted. Stay small and you stay safe. And for a while, it worked. Shrinking kept you out of crosshairs. Dimming your presence kept relationships comfortable. Holding back your perception kept people from calling you too intense, too much, too sensitive. You learned to absorb those phrases like they were diagnoses instead of what they actually were. The discomfort of someone standing next to refined metal and not understanding why their skin felt warm. Here's what nobody tells you. The people who told you to shrink weren't always wrong about the danger. They were wrong about the solution. Visibility does carry risk, but the risk isn't in being seen. The risk is in being seen by people who don't have the capacity to handle what they're looking at. And instead of teaching you to discern who deserves access to your presence, the world taught you to shut the whole thing down. That's like owning a furnace and boarding up the door because one person got burned standing too close. Think about what that cost you. Every time you walked into a room and felt the atmosphere shift, felt people respond to something unnamed in you, and your first move was to shrink, you weren't being humble. You were leaking power. Real, measurable, consequential power. Because shrinking under attention isn't neutral. It sends a signal too. It tells the room that you don't trust what you carry. It tells the opportunist that your boundaries are soft. It tells the person who actually needed your steadiness that you're not available. And it tells your own nervous system over and over again that what the refiner built inside you is something to apologize for rather than steward. You've been running that program for years, maybe decades, and the energy it costs you is staggering, not because shrinking is physically exhausting, but because maintaining a frequency below your actual composition requires constant suppression. You're spending fuel every day just to stay dimmer than you actually are. Now watch this. There are two responses the world offers when someone carries a presence that shifts rooms, and both of them are traps. The first is the one you've been living in: shrink, minimize, make yourself easy to digest. The second is the opposite extreme: inflate, perform, demand that every room acknowledge you. One makes you invisible, the other makes you insufferable. And the reason both fail is because both are reactions to other people's responses instead of a grounded understanding of your own composition. The old you asked, "Why are they looking at me?" and immediately adjusted to make the looking stop. The version the refiner is building doesn't ask why they're looking. It already knows. And knowing changes everything about how you carry yourself, not with arrogance, not with anxiety, but with the settled weight of someone who understands exactly what came out of that furnace. Let me ground this somewhere real. You're at a dinner with people you haven't seen in a while. Someone makes a comment, subtle, almost casual, about how you've changed. You seem different. You're quieter than you used to be. The old lens hears that as criticism and immediately scrambles to perform the version they remember, laughing louder, talking more, filling every silence with proof that you're still the person they're comfortable with. That scramble is the leak. That's where power exits your system in real time, because the truth underneath their comment isn't judgment, it's recognition. They're registering that the metal changed temperature. They don't have language for it, so they call it different. And if you react by reverting to raw ore just to make them comfortable, you're volunteering to undo what the fire built. Stay with me, because the reactions you're receiving aren't just recognition of what changed. They're sorted into categories, and learning to read those categories is the difference between being confused by attention and being informed by it. Those categories are already operating around you. You just haven't been given the framework to read them until now. Every reaction you've received in the last few months, every lingering glance, every shift in someone's tone when you entered a conversation, every friendship that quietly cooled without explanation, none of it was random social noise. It was data, specific, readable, categorized data. And once you learn to sort it, the confusion you've been carrying dissolves and something far more useful takes its place. Clarity. Not the kind that makes you paranoid about every interaction, the kind that lets you walk into any room and understand exactly what's happening beneath the surface before a single word is exchanged. Here's the framework. When refined metal comes into contact with unrefined material, there are only 3 possible reactions, not 20, not an infinite spectrum of human complexity. 3. And every interaction you've been puzzling over falls cleanly into one of them. The first is gravitational pull. You've felt this one. Someone draws closer to you without a clear reason. They want to sit near you at the table. They ask your opinion on things you haven't claimed expertise in. They linger after conversations everyone else has already walked away from. They can't explain why, and honestly, neither can you. But the mechanics are simple. When someone is carrying unresolved thirst for peace, for clarity, for the kind of grounded presence that doesn't perform, and they encounter a source that carries those things as composition rather than costume, they gravitate. It's not admiration. It's not even conscious. It's the same instinct that pulls a dehydrated body toward water before the mind has registered the word thirst. These people aren't drawn to your personality. They're drawn to the frequency the refiner sealed into your structure. Think about that. The second reaction is silent withdrawal. This one confuses people more than any other because it looks like rejection but operates on completely different mechanics. Someone who used to be close starts pulling back, fewer calls, shorter texts, a vague distance that wasn't there 6 months ago. You search your memory for what you did wrong and find nothing, because you didn't do anything wrong. Here's what actually happened. Refined metal is reflective. It shows everything around it with uncomfortable accuracy. And some people, when they stand close to someone whose composition has changed, start seeing their own reflection more clearly than they want to. Their stagnation, their unaddressed wounds, their compromises they've been calling contentment. Your presence didn't create those things. Your presence illuminated them. And rather than face what the reflection is showing, they step back, not out of malice, but out of self-preservation. The withdrawal isn't about you. It's about what proximity to you reveals about them. Don't chase it. Don't mourn it. Read it for what it is and let it inform your next move. The third reaction is the sharpest and the most disorienting. Unprovoked friction. You said nothing controversial. You didn't challenge anyone. You didn't compete or criticize or threaten. But someone in the room turned cold, maybe a co-worker whose tone shifted without cause, maybe a family member who suddenly became dismissive at a gathering, maybe a stranger whose expression hardened the moment you made eye contact. This reaction runs deeper than the other two because it's not about attraction or avoidance, it's about exposure. When someone is actively hiding something from themselves, insecurity dressed as confidence, fear performing as control, emptiness disguised as busyness, and they encounter a presence that carries genuine stillness, the disguise starts to malfunction. Your calm doesn't attack their chaos. It simply makes the chaos louder by contrast. And people who aren't ready to hear their own noise will blame the nearest source of quiet for making it audible. Anointed one, let that land. You haven't been imagining the friction, you haven't been manufacturing the distance, and you certainly haven't been earning the warmth through performance. All three reactions, the pull, the withdrawal, the friction, are responses to the same cause. Your composition changed. The furnace did what furnaces do. And now, every environment you step into runs a chemical test against what you carry, whether anyone in that environment is conscious of it or not. The refiner didn't warn you this would happen because the fire was already enough to process at the time. But now that you're out the other side, you need to understand the reactions, not so you can control them, but so you can stop letting them control you. Because there's a mechanism underneath all of this that explains not just why people react, but why the reactions are intensifying right now in this specific season. And that mechanism has everything to do with a shift that happened inside you so quietly you almost missed it. That shift has a name, and it's more mechanical than mystical. What changed inside you isn't abstract, it's structural. 3 specific things merged during those furnace seasons, and their combined output is what every person in your environment has been reacting to. Not your appearance, not your achievements, not the story you tell about yourself, the signal you emit before you open your mouth. That signal is built from 3 components operating simultaneously, and understanding them is the difference between walking through life confused by reactions and walking through life reading them like a native language. The first component is your emotional baseline, not what you feel during a peak moment of joy or a valley of grief, but what you feel when absolutely nothing is happening. Sit alone in a quiet room with no phone, no music, no distraction. What's the resting state of your inner world? Before the furnace, your baseline was probably anxiety dressed as productivity, a low hum of unease that you'd learned to manage by staying busy, staying useful, staying needed. But the fire burned the fuel that anxiety was feeding on: the need for approval, the fear of being forgotten, the compulsive urge to prove that you belong. What replaced it wasn't excitement or confidence in the way the world defines those words. It was something the world has almost no framework for: settled certainty, the kind that doesn't need external confirmation to hold its shape. And here's what nobody tells you: that shift in baseline radiates outward whether you want it to or not. A person carrying anxiety as their default broadcasts a signal that attracts situations confirming the anxiety. A person carrying settled certainty broadcasts something entirely different. Opportunities respond to it. People recalibrate around it. Rooms reorganize because of it. Same person, different baseline, completely different world taking shape around them. The second component is presence quality, and this one is felt before it's understood. When you walk into a room, people register your presence before they process your words. Presence isn't volume. It isn't charisma in the theatrical sense. It's the weight of someone who is fully located in the current moment, rather than scattered across 10 mental conversations happening simultaneously. You've met someone like this before. They don't fidget. They don't rush. When they look at you, you feel seen in a way that's almost uncomfortable because so few people actually occupy the moment they're standing in. That quality isn't a personality trait. It's the dividend of inner silence. When the furnace burned away, the mental noise, what remained was the ability to be completely present. And complete presence in a world full of fragmented attention is so rare that it registers as power before anyone consciously identifies what they're sensing. Stay with me, because this is where it touches your money, your career, and every negotiation you'll ever sit in. Picture this. You're in a meeting, 10 people around a table, everyone presenting ideas, defending positions, filling every second with sound. You haven't spoken for 30 minutes. Not because you're disengaged, because you're absorbing the room the way still water absorbs every stone thrown into it. Eventually, someone turns to you and asks what you think. 3 sentences, maybe 4. And the entire room stops. Not because the content was more brilliant than what came before, because 30 minutes of disciplined silence created a gravitational field that those 3 sentences inherited. Every word landed differently because the silence before them had weight. That wasn't a technique you rehearsed. That was a capacity built in the furnace during the exact seasons you thought nothing was happening. The third component is your response pattern, the space between what happens to you and what you do about it. A person operating at a low frequency reacts instantly. Anger arrives and they swing. Fear arrives and they run. Insult arrives and they defend. There's no gap between the event and the response, which means there's no room for choice. A person who's been through the refiner's fire has cultivated a gap, sometimes only a few seconds wide, but those seconds contain everything. Now watch this. Apply it to a salary negotiation. The reactive person hears pushback on their number and immediately drops the price, fills the silence with justifications, over-explains why they're worth it, and in doing so, communicates that their value requires a defense attorney. The person carrying refined response pattern hears the same pushback and pauses, breathes, lets the silence sit, then responds from assessment, not from fear. The person across the table feels the difference before they understand it, and it changes the terms of every deal you'll ever enter. Chosen one. This is why the reactions around you have been intensifying. Your baseline shifted, your presence deepened, your response pattern slowed from reactive to deliberate. 3 internal changes, quiet, invisible, unmeasurable by any test the world currently offers, and yet every single person who comes within range of you registers all 3 before you've said a word. The signal is real, the reactions are accurate, and now that you understand the mechanics, you need the protocol for reading those reactions instead of being destabilized by them. The protocol isn't complicated, but it requires a shift in posture that most people never make. You've spent years interpreting reactions emotionally. Someone stares and you feel exposed. Someone pulls away and you feel rejected. Someone turns cold and you feel blamed. Every reaction filtered through the same question: what does this mean about me? That question kept you trapped in a loop where other people's responses became the thermostat of your inner world. The protocol breaks that loop permanently. It doesn't ask, what does this mean about me? It asks, what is this telling me about them, about this environment, about what my next move should be? Same data, completely different operating system. And the moment you make that switch, reactions stop being threats and start becoming the most reliable intelligence network you've ever had access to. Here's the first tool: body check. When someone reacts to your presence, a lingering stare, an unexpected shift in tone, a warmth or coldness that doesn't match the context, don't look at them first. Look inward. Scan your own body before you scan the room. Chest tightening. That's a warning signal. Something about this person or this environment is misaligned with what the refiner built in you. Breathing steady, shoulders relaxed, no internal alarm. That's confirmation. What you're sensing is genuine recognition, not a threat. Here's where this saves you real money and real years. You're sitting across from a potential business partner. The proposal looks perfect on paper, the numbers work, the timeline is reasonable, but every time you meet something in your gut clenches, not dramatically, just a low tightening, you keep dismissing as nerves. That's not nerves. That's the furnace-calibrated warning system doing exactly what it was built to do. The refiner didn't just change your composition. He installed an alarm that rings at frequencies your conscious mind can't always hear. Your body hears it first. Trust the body before you trust the spreadsheet. The second tool is pattern over promise. Stop evaluating people by what they say during their best performance. Evaluate by what they repeat when no one's keeping score. Words are easy to craft. Patterns are almost impossible to fake. A colleague praises your work in front of leadership, but consistently forgets to include you in emails where actual decisions are made. The praise is noise. The missing emails are data. A friend tells you they're happy for your growth, but changes the subject every time you share something that's going well. The words are warm. The pattern is cold. Read the pattern. Ignore the script. This isn't cynicism. It's the discernment upgrade. The refiner installed during every season. Someone's words didn't match their behavior, and you had to learn the difference through pain instead of instruction. Now you have the instruction. Use it before the pain becomes necessary again. The third tool is the peace test, and it's the simplest and the most disruptive to everything the world trained you to value. Before any significant decision, a job offer, a partnership, a relocation, a relationship that's asking for deeper access, ask one question. Does this carry peace or pressure? Not excitement. Peace. The distinction matters because the world has trained you to read adrenaline as confirmation. Heart-racing, stomach-flipping urgency, building the world calls that passion. But urgency and alignment feel nothing alike. I learned this when something small and unremarkable arrived in my life, an opportunity that didn't look like the breakthrough I'd been praying for. No fanfare, no impressive packaging, almost ignored it because it felt too ordinary. But there was peace on it. Not adrenaline, not urgency, just a quiet settledness that didn't demand immediate action. Months later, that ordinary opening became the doorway to everything that followed. The refiner doesn't rush what he's already secured. Anything that demands you decide before you've had time to breathe isn't from the furnace, it's from the noise outside it. Chosen one. These three tools, body check pattern over promise, peace test, aren't spiritual abstractions. They're operational equipment forged in the same fire that changed your composition. The furnace didn't just make you different, it made you precise. And precision, once you learn to trust it, doesn't just protect you from wrong doors, it accelerates you toward right ones. But there's a deeper layer underneath the reactions and the protocol. A layer that connects every furnace season you survived to the specific quality of presence people are responding to right now. And that connection reshapes how you see everything you've been through. That connection is one most people never make because it requires looking backward with a lens the world doesn't hand out. The world tells you to move on from painful seasons. Forget what hurt you. Close that chapter and start fresh. And that advice sounds wise until you realize what it actually does. It severs you from the very material that produced the composition people are now responding to. Every furnace season you survived left a specific residue inside your structure. Not damage. Residue. The way fire leaves carbon in steel, not as a flaw, but as the ingredient that makes the metal harder, more resilient, more capable of holding an edge under pressure. Your pain wasn't pointless. It was an ingredient. And the refiner was precise about how much heat, how long, and what needed to burn away before the composition was complete. Let me get specific, because vague spiritual language about suffering being purposeful helps no one. Think about the season of loneliness, not the kind where you were physically alone, but the kind where you sat in crowded rooms and felt like you were behind glass. Everyone laughing, connecting, belonging to something that seemed to reject your specific shape. That season wasn't cruelty. That was the refiner removing your dependency on external validation as a fuel source. Before that fire, your confidence ran on the approval of whoever was closest. After it, something shifted. You stopped needing the room to confirm you before you could function in it. That's not a small change. That's a complete rewiring of your operating system. And the steadiness people feel when they stand near you now, that's the direct product of every night you sat with yourself and didn't collapse when no one came to tell you that you mattered. You built a foundation in that silence that most people never develop because they never had to sit in that specific furnace long enough for the dependency to burn clean. Now think about the betrayal, the one that still sits in your chest when you let yourself remember it. Someone you trusted used what you gave them against you. Not a stranger. Someone close. Someone who had access. The world calls that a wound. The refiner calls it curriculum. Here's what that fire actually produced: the ability to read intention beneath language. Before the betrayal, you took people at face value because it never occurred to you that someone standing that close would use proximity as a weapon. After it, something activated. You started hearing what wasn't being said. You started feeling the weight behind words instead of just processing their surface meaning. That's the discernment you now carry, and it wasn't downloaded from heaven in a mystical moment. It was forged in a specific fire that required a specific betrayal to produce a specific capability. Stay with me, because this is where it becomes practical enough to spend. You're sitting across from someone who's in crisis. Maybe a friend, maybe a colleague, maybe someone who wandered into your life at the exact wrong moment in theirs. They're spiraling finances, collapsing relationship, fracturing identity, unraveling. Everyone around them is doing one of two things: panicking alongside them or offering shallow advice from a safe distance. You do neither. You sit, you hold steady. You don't rush to fill the silence with solutions because you've learned that silence itself carries weight when the person holding it has been tested. And that person, the one falling apart, grabs onto your stillness like it's the only solid thing in the room. They can't explain why being near you feels like the ground stopped shaking, but you can. You earned that stillness in the furnace. Every night you sat alone with your own crisis and nobody came. That was training. The refiner was teaching you to be the anchor you never had, so that when the moment came to hold weight for someone else, your structure wouldn't crack under the load. Isaiah wrote it plainly. I have tested you in the furnace of affliction, not the furnace of punishment. Affliction. The distinction matters because punishment implies you did something wrong. Affliction implies you were given something heavy to carry, so the carrying itself would change your capacity. The fire wasn't corrective, it was constructive. Every season that felt like waste was actually production, the refiner converting raw experience into structural capability that now shows up as the presence people can't stop reacting to. Anointed one. This is the part most people skip. They want the transfer, the provision, the positioning, the open doors, without understanding that the furnace is what qualifies them to hold it. You didn't skip it. You walked through every degree of heat. And what's forming around you now isn't coincidence. It's consequence, the natural, mechanical, unavoidable result of a composition that was changed by fire and is now being recognized by every environment it enters. But recognition alone doesn't complete the process. What comes next is the reason the refiner spent so long on your structure in the first place. Because what's approaching you requires more than a changed composition. It requires a tested foundation. And that foundation is being measured right now in ways you haven't noticed yet. The measurement is subtle. It doesn't arrive as a dramatic trial or a visible test with a clear pass-fail line. It arrives as ordinary moments that carry hidden weight, the kind only a trained eye would recognize as evaluation. And that's exactly what makes it so effective. The refiner doesn't test your foundation by throwing boulders at it. He places small, precise loads on specific points and watches what shifts. A compliment that tempts you to build your identity around someone else's approval again. A delay that invites you to panic and force a door that wasn't ready to open. An opportunity that looks like provision but carries no peace underneath the packaging. These aren't random life events. They're stress tests, and every one of them is asking the same question: can this structure hold what I'm about to place on it? Here's the thing. A blacksmith doesn't test a blade by admiring it. He strikes it against resistance, not to break it to confirm that the forging was complete. The strike that shatters the blade reveals a flaw in the process. The strike that rings clean confirms the metal is ready for deployment. You've been struck recently, maybe not by catastrophe, but by specific targeted pressure that felt disproportionate to the situation. A small rejection that stung deeper than it should have. A financial hiccup that triggered old survival instincts you thought were gone. A conversation that pulled you back toward a version of yourself you'd already outgrown. Those moments weren't setbacks. They were the blacksmith's hammer checking your edge. And if you're still standing, not perfectly, not without feeling it, but standing, that's the ring of clean metal. That's confirmation. Let me walk you through 3 specific stress tests you may be experiencing right now, because naming them strips their power to destabilize you. The first is the attractive door with no peace behind it. Opportunities have been surfacing, maybe a job offer, a partnership proposal, a financial move that looks smart on paper. Everything logical says yes, but something in your gut says wait. Not no, just wait. The old you would have charged through that door because hesitation felt like weakness and speed felt like faith. But speed isn't faith. Speed is often fear wearing ambition's jacket. The refiner is watching whether you can distinguish between a door he opened and a door that simply isn't locked. There's a difference. An open door carries peace even when the outcome isn't guaranteed. An unlocked door carries pressure disguised as urgency. Think about that before your next yes. The second stress test is the comparison trigger. Someone in your circle, maybe someone with less experience, less depth, less time in the furnace, receives something you've been waiting for. A promotion, a financial breakthrough, public recognition, and something inside tightens. Not hatred, not even jealousy in the way the world defines it, just a quiet ache that whispers, why them and not me? Pay attention to this, because that whisper isn't your authentic voice. That's residue from a baseline the furnace was supposed to burn clean. If it still has fuel, the foundation isn't fully set. And the refiner won't place transfer weight on a foundation that still shifts when someone else's blessing lands nearby. The response that passes this test isn't forced celebration or performed happiness for their success. It's genuine disinterest in the comparison itself. The settled knowledge that their timeline has nothing to do with yours and their provision came from a different blueprint entirely. When you can watch someone receive what you're waiting for and feel nothing shift in your foundation, the test is complete. Not before. The third stress test is the silence exam, the season where nothing visible is moving. No doors opening, no doors closing, no dramatic signs, no clear instructions, just quiet. And in that quiet, every unresolved insecurity you carry starts pacing the room like a trapped animal. Am I forgotten? Did I miss my window? Was the furnace all there is? The refiner is watching one thing during this test, whether you can hold your position without external validation, confirming that the position is correct. Because where you're going, there will be seasons of execution where the results lag behind the obedience by months, sometimes years. If silence makes you abandon your post, the transfer would crush you the moment the applause went quiet. Chosen one. The weight test isn't punishment. It's the refiner's final quality check before he places what he's been preparing on the structure he's been building. You don't need to pass perfectly. You need to pass honestly, feeling the pressure, acknowledging the strain, and choosing to hold your ground anyway. Not because you're strong enough on your own, but because the composition the fire produced is strong enough to carry what your old structure never could. And what it's about to carry isn't abstract. It has specific dimensions: financial, relational, positional, and understanding those dimensions before they arrive is the difference between receiving a blessing and being buried by one. Here's what most people get wrong about supernatural transfer. They imagine it as a single dramatic event, a check arriving from nowhere, a phone call that changes everything overnight, a sudden explosion of abundance that erases every struggle in one stroke. And because they're waiting for the explosion, they walk past the actual transfer happening right in front of them. Because transfer, the real kind, the kind the refiner engineers, almost never arrives loud. It arrives precise. A blade doesn't announce itself when it's placed in the right hand. It simply begins to cut what it was forged to cut. No fanfare, no ceremony, just function meeting purpose at the exact point of contact. And that's what's beginning to happen around you right now, not in the way you expected, which is exactly why you need to know what to look for before you accidentally dismiss it as ordinary. Transfer operates through 3 channels, and none of them look like what the world trained you to expect. The first is access transfer, the quiet repositioning that places you within reach of rooms, conversations, and relationships that weren't available to you before the furnace. This doesn't arrive as a golden invitation with your name embossed on it. It arrives as a conversation that wasn't supposed to happen, a connection made through someone you barely know, a seat at a table you didn't campaign for. Here's a real scenario. You attend something routine, a work event, a community gathering, a casual introduction through a mutual friend. Nothing about it feels significant in the moment. But 3 months later, that single interaction has opened a corridor you couldn't have engineered with 5 years of strategic networking. That wasn't luck. That was positioning the refiner, placing refined metal exactly where it needed to be at exactly the right moment. The old you would have been too busy performing, too anxious to be present, too scattered to notice the weight of what was standing right next to you. The furnace fixed that. Now you're present enough to recognize access when it shows up without a label. The second channel is clarity transfer, and this one is the most undervalued because it doesn't look like provision at all. It looks like seeing. Something shifts in your perception. Suddenly, a skill you've carried for a decade stops being background noise and starts looking like an asset you've never properly valued. A problem you've been solving for free in every friendship, every workplace, every family dynamic suddenly reveals itself as the exact service people pay significant money for in professional contexts. You didn't gain anything new, you gained sight. The fog that kept you from recognizing the commercial and strategic value of what you naturally carry, that fog was burned off in the furnace. Now watch this. I know someone who spent years giving relational advice to everyone in their circle. Friends called at midnight, colleagues pulled them aside before every major decision. Family members treated them as the unofficial counselor for every crisis. All free, all draining, all taken for granted. Then one season of clarity hit, and they realized this isn't a personality quirk. This is a consultative skill set that companies hire for, that leaders pay premium rates to access, that entire industries are built around. Nothing changed about what they carried. Everything changed about how they saw it. Within a year, the same wisdom that used to drain their energy for free was generating income that matched its actual value. That's clarity transfer. The refiner didn't send new resources. He removed the blindness that kept existing resources from being deployed where they belonged. The third channel is timing transfer, and this requires the most trust because it operates on a delay you can't control. You don't create the opportunity. You don't strategize it into existence. You stand in position, composition intact, foundation tested, and the opportunity finds you because you're finally standing where it was always going to pass. Let me be direct about what this looks like. The largest shift in my own life didn't come from a plan I designed. It came from being in the right position, mentally stable, spiritually grounded, practically available when something moved through my environment that I would have missed entirely 2 years earlier. Not because it was hidden, because I was too fragmented to recognize it, too reactive to be trusted with it, too unstable to hold it without dropping something essential. The furnace fixed the fragmentation. The stress tests confirmed the stability, and when the timing aligned, there was no chase involved. Just recognition, meeting readiness at a specific coordinate that couldn't have been manufactured by effort alone. Anointed one. The transfer isn't coming someday in some abstract future. The channels are already active. Access is being arranged through connections you haven't fully traced yet. Clarity is sharpening around assets you've been undervaluing for years, and timing is converging on a coordinate that your current position is moving toward, whether you feel the momentum or not. The refiner doesn't forge metal and leave it in a drawer. He forges it for function-specific, purposeful, irreplaceable function. But function without protection is a blade left out in the rain, and what's coming toward you is too precisely crafted to be corroded by the 3 threats that destroy more transfers than any external enemy ever could. Those threats are already circling, and you need to see them before they land. Those 3 threats don't announce themselves with warning labels. They show up wearing the faces of familiar people, reasonable opportunities, and emotions you've trusted your whole life. That's what makes them effective. They don't look like danger, they look like normal. And if you're not equipped to identify them before they make contact, the transfer the refiner spent years engineering can leak out of your life as quietly as it arrived. There's a principle in metalwork that most people outside the trade never learn. After a blade is forged, after the heat, the hammering, the shaping, there's a final stage called tempering. The metal is cooled at a controlled rate, not quenched in cold water, which makes it hard but brittle, not left to cool on its own, which leaves it soft and unable to hold an edge. Tempered at the right speed in the right conditions, the metal retains both hardness and flexibility. It can absorb impact without shattering. It can bend under pressure without losing its shape. Skip the tempering and the blade looks finished, but breaks the first time it meets real resistance. That's what happens to transfer without stewardship. It arrives, it looks like breakthrough, and then it fractures under the weight of the first threat that nobody warned you about. The first threat is the anchor people who need you to stay the version they're comfortable with. Here's how it shows up. You step into a new level, a financial shift, a professional repositioning, a relational boundary that signals growth, and someone close to you starts pulling backward. Not aggressively, subtly. They remind you of who you used to be with a tone that sounds like nostalgia, but functions as a leash. Remember when you were more fun? You've changed. I feel like I don't know you anymore. Those phrases aren't observations. They're invitations to revert. And the danger isn't that they're malicious. Most of the time they genuinely don't know what they're doing. The danger is that you still carry enough residual guilt about outgrowing people that the invitation lands. Here's the protocol. You don't confront. You don't explain. You don't argue about whether you've changed. Of course you've changed, the furnace made sure of that. You simply adjust access. Share less about what's forming. Invest less emotional bandwidth in defending your trajectory. Let their influence shrink to its appropriate size without making a production out of the reduction. Stewardship sometimes looks like a quiet downgrade that protects the work without destroying the relationship. The second threat is emotional decision-making in a season that requires spiritual discernment. When provision arrives, real provision, the kind that shifts your financial position or expands your sphere of influence, emotions surge. Excitement wants to spend before the foundation is set. Gratitude wants to share with everyone before you've identified who can be trusted with proximity to what's new. Fear wants to lock everything down so tight that the blessing can't circulate the way it was designed to. All 3 impulses feel valid in the moment. None of them are reliable operating systems for what you're stepping into. Stay with me. The refiner taught you discernment during seasons of scarcity when you had to sense which opportunity was aligned and which was just loud. That same discernment doesn't retire when abundance arrives. It becomes more critical, because the wrong yes when you have nothing costs you time. The wrong yes when you're carrying transfer costs you years and resources you may not recover. If a decision demands you move before you've had time to breathe, before peace has settled underneath the excitement, before you've consulted the same internal protocol that guided you through the furnace, that urgency isn't from the refiner. He never panics. He never rushes what he's already secured. And anything that pressures you to act faster than peace can travel is operating on a frequency that didn't come from the fire. The third threat is premature exposure, sharing what's sacred before it's rooted. There's a reason new growth happens underground before it breaks the surface. Roots need darkness protection, undisturbed soil. The same principle applies to everything the refiner is transferring into your life right now. Not every answered prayer needs a platform. Not every breakthrough needs an audience. Not every open door needs to be announced on the day you walk through it. Jesus healed a man and then said something that puzzles most readers tell no one. Not because the miracle was fragile, because the season required protection more than promotion. Think about your own life, the moments you shared too early, a plan that was still forming, a relationship that was still being tested, a financial shift that hadn't fully materialized, and watch the energy around it change the moment other people's opinions, expectations, and projections entered the space. That wasn't bad luck. That was exposure before the roots could hold. The protocol here is the simplest of the three and the hardest to practice. Guard your silence. Let new things grow in the dark until they're strong enough to survive the wind above ground. You'll know when it's time to speak, not because the excitement is overwhelming, but because the peace around it is so settled that no external reaction could shift what's already been established inside you. Anointed One. Tempering is the final act of the forge. It's the difference between a blade that looks sharp and a blade that stays sharp under sustained use. The refiner didn't bring you through fire just to watch the transfer shatter on first contact. He's teaching you stewardship in real time through every boundary you hold, every silence you choose, every impulse you let pass without acting on it. The composition is set. The stress tests confirmed the structure. The transfer channels are active. What remains is the steadiness to hold all of it without leaking, without reverting, and without handing access to hands that haven't earned proximity to what the furnace produced. And now, chosen one, standing at the threshold where everything converges, there's one final truth the refiner wants sealed into your structure before you step forward. It's quieter than everything that came before, and it carries more weight than all of it combined. That truth is this: you were not forged to be admired, you were forged to be placed. There's a difference that changes everything about how you carry yourself from this moment forward. Admiration is what happens when people see the shine on refined metal and appreciate it from a distance. Placement is what happens when that metal gets set into the exact position it was designed to serve: the blade into the handle, the key into the lock, the crown onto the head that was measured for it before the gold was ever poured. Admiration requires an audience. Placement requires alignment. And the refiner has never been interested in making you impressive. He's been interested in making you functional, precisely, irreplaceably, structurally functional in a role that was designed around your specific composition before the first flame ever touched you. Let me trace what happened across these chapters so you can see the full architecture from above. You walked in carrying confusion about reactions you couldn't explain, stares that lingered, friction that appeared without cause, warmth from strangers, and distance from people you expected to stay close. You learned that those reactions weren't random. They were chemical responses to a composition that changed in the furnace, a composition built from 3 components that merge into a signal every person in your environment reads before you speak. You were handed a protocol for reading those reactions as intelligence instead of being destabilized by them. You saw the connection between every painful season you survived and the specific quality of presence that people can't stop responding to. You understood why the refiner stress tests the foundation before placing transfer weight on it. You learned what transfer actually looks like, not dramatic, not loud, but precise, operating through access, clarity, and timing in ways the old you would have walked right past. And you were warned about the 3 threats that corrode more transfers than any external enemy: the anchors, the emotional impulse, the premature exposure. That's not a collection of ideas you listen to. That's a reconstruction. And the refiner doesn't reconstruct without purpose. Here's the thing. The reactions aren't going to stop. People will keep staring. Rooms will keep shifting when you enter. Some will draw closer without knowing why. Others will pull away without being able to explain it. And a few will push back against a presence that exposes what they've been hiding from themselves. None of that is your burden to manage. All of it is your signal to read. You don't shrink under attention anymore. That program was uninstalled in the furnace. You don't inflate under it either. That was never your design. You stand, grounded, present, reading the room with tools that were forged in fire and calibrated through seasons of silence that most people will never understand. Take a breath right now. Not a rushed one, the kind that tells your nervous system the fire is behind you and the function is ahead. Let everything you've heard settle past your intellect into the place where knowing becomes structure, where truth stops being something you agree with and starts becoming something your next decision is built on. The refiner who sat by the furnace and watched every degree of heat is the same one arranging what comes next. He didn't leave during the fire. He won't leave during the placement. And the same precision that controlled the temperature is now controlling the timing of every door, every connection, every resource that's been assigned to your name before you knew it existed. Anointed One, you've walked through the full forge. That alone separates you from everyone who stepped away when the heat got specific. What you carry now isn't theory. It's composition, tested, tempered, and ready for the weight it was built to hold. If something in these words landed deeper than your thinking mind, in the place where recognition happens before explanation catches up, then do one thing. Don't write for me. Write for yourself. One line in the comments. The truth you've known but stopped living by. Put it down as a marker today. I stopped questioning what the fire confirmed. And if there's someone in your life still wondering why they're seen differently, still mistaking the signal for a flaw, still confusing the furnace with punishment, send this to them. Not because these words are special, because sometimes a person just needs to hear that what the fire left on them isn't a scar, it's a seal, and it was placed there on purpose.